happy to be with you all this morning. It's been quite some time since I have been back home and back worshiping with you all. So it's a great pleasure to be here and to also be able to have an opportunity to speak from God's Word with you all this morning. I'm going to lower that down because my voice is very loud. If you would, keep your books open then to that passage that Aaron just read for us in Proverbs chapter 3. I know you all have been studying Proverbs, so you probably have already covered this passage earlier in your study. The key part of this passage that I wanted to pull out with you this morning is found in verse 5, where it says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding." I came across a hymn that was centered around the idea of trust his heart. Focusing on various aspects of what that means to trust in Jesus in various different circumstances, both maybe just in our daily life, our spiritual walk, how we interact with others, how we face trials and temptations, all of those various aspects. And this hymn was very appealing to me, and so for this morning's lesson, I simply broke up this hymn into different pieces of each verse, and then we'll end with the chorus at the end of this sermon. And I just want to pull out one thought from each portion of this hymn to share with you this morning. So as the hymn begins, it begins with, "All things work for our good, though sometimes we can't see how they could. Struggles that break our hearts in two sometimes blind us to the truth." And that truth is simply that even though there are going to be hard times, we're going to face various trials, whether it's within our family, our jobs, our spiritual walk, so many various things can go wrong. And we each are going to experience different trials and difficult times, some of which we will look at from in the moment and think, how can I get through this? How is it that I can overcome these things? And what's important for us to recognize is, although God does have a plan for us, He is not the one that puts the evil in our path. He's the one that helps us overcome the evil in our path. Things happen. Accidents occur, things that we cannot predict, whether it's illness, loss of a job. Those things will just happen to anyone, regardless of your circumstance. What's important for us to recognize is that we do have a God who's there to help us overcome them, and when we do overcome them, we emerge stronger than we were prior. So if you would, turn to Luke chapter 6. Luke chapter 6 and verse 22. Luke chapter 6 and verse 22. Jesus spoke, "Blessed are you when men hate you, and when they exclude you, and revile you, and cast out your name as evil for the Son of Man's sake. Rejoice in that day and leap for joy, for indeed your reward is great in heaven, for in like manner their fathers did to the prophets." Back in Virginia, I'm teaching the high school Bible class, and for this quarter, we're basically just going through the book of Acts, going through the beginnings of the church as we begin with the day of Pentecost and go forward through time. And one of the unique things that you come across very quickly, starting in Acts chapter 4, and you also see aspects of this in chapter 5, is very immediately the Pharisees and the Sadducees and those members of the Sanhedrin pulled Peter and John aside and were questioning them, interrogating them, saying, "Why are you preaching this Jesus character?" And from one aspect, you would think all the other new Christians are going to be terrified. Here, we just started up this new work, we're excited about it, and immediately we're now in trouble with the law. We're already being pulled in, cast aside, and seen as rebels, as criminals. But their reaction afterwards, instead of praying for, "Don't let this thing happen again," or "We want to see the Sanhedrin pay for what they're doing to us because they're persecuting us," they pray for boldness. They pray for courage that they can continue standing up for Christ in face of all of the trials that they're going to be facing, recognizing that those trials are going to come. So I'm going to pray for boldness that I can remain steadfast and true, because as Jesus spoke and as Peter and John brought up and as Stephen brought up in his sermon, this is what the Israelites did to all the prophets before. And James has a similar message of encouragement when we face trials as well. In James chapter 1, at the very beginning of his letter, in James chapter 1 and verse 2, "My brethren, count it all joy when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces patience. But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. I don't think what James is saying is be happy that you're suffering, be happy that all these bad things are happening to you, and be happy because these horrible things are going on. That's not what he's saying. He's saying after you've gone through it, be glad that you were able to overcome it because you trusted in God to get you through it, and you've now emerged stronger than you were before. You don't need to take comfort in the fact that the trial happened, but take comfort in the fact that you have gotten past it, that you've overcome it, that God has lifted you up to grow your faith and trust in him, and that's helped you carry yourself through those difficult times. So as this verse continues, our Father knows what's best for us. His ways are not our own. So when your pathway grows dim and you just can't see him, remember you're never alone. I think COVID taught us that even though we have tremendous means of communication in this modern era where within seconds I can be face to face with a loved one that is thousands of miles away, it's not the same as being together with them physically. The technology, it helps us stay in communication, but there's still a disconnect. There is still something different than being with you all here this morning. It means something because it is still difficult for us to fully appreciate the fact that we are never alone if we are trusting in God. There's another hymn that I could have done another study on. His eye is on the sparrow. I don't think I've heard that hymn sung in a very long time, but it's a great message, right? If you turn to Luke chapter 12, we'll see where this hymn comes from. Luke chapter 12, starting in verse 4. Luke 12, starting in verse 4, Jesus again speaks and say, I say to you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, and after that have no more that they can do. But I will show you whom you should fear. Fear him who after he has killed has power to cast into hell. Yes, I say to you, fear him. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 copper coins, and not one of them is forgotten before God? But the very hairs on your head are all numbered. Do not fear, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows. If God is able to take the time to watch over every single sparrow, he has time to watch over me as well, because he holds us in greater esteem. He sent his son not to die for the sparrow. He sent his son to die for us. He holds us in high esteem. He sees the value in us. So when we have those moments where we are feeling like we are disconnected, or we have that sense of loneliness, back in my first year living in Virginia, there were times where I kind of realized, it is really just me. I go to work, I come home, I cook for myself, and that's it. I go to bed. I repeat. Even though I know that I have family that loves me, I know God is watching out for me, I still kept falling into that sense of loneliness. We don't need to feel that way. We can trust in God because he is there to comfort us. And the apostles had different moments in their experience with Jesus because, as you can imagine, continuing through this study of Acts, in the very beginning of Acts, we hear of the ascension of Jesus back into heaven, and the apostles are standing there waiting again. And I was trying to get my students to think about this for a minute. Apostles are traveling with Jesus, studying with him, learning from him. He dies. They're at a loss. They don't know what just happened. They still don't fully understand what the purpose of Jesus was in that, and so they're very sorrowful that he's gone. He comes back. They spend some more time with him, and then he leaves again. Jesus knew that they would need an extra comforter. And so in John chapter 14 and verse 15, Jesus spoke to the apostles saying, if you love me, keep my commandments, and I will pray the Father, and he will give you another helper, that he may abide with you forever. The Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive because it neither sees him nor knows him, but you know him, for he dwells with you and will be with you. I will not leave you orphans. I will come to you. Although Jesus is not physically walking among us anymore, he is still with us. We just have to reach out and want to see him, want to cling to him. We have to make that choice. remember you are never alone if you trust in Jesus. Verse number 2. If he sees the master plan, and he holds our future in his hand. So don't live as those who have no hope. All our hope is found in him. Those who live without hope have restrictions. If they have no hope, there's nothing to strive for. There's nothing that is going to continue pushing me forward. I'm just going to be held back by my own restrictions, shortcomings, because I am confined to just what I am capable of doing by myself. In Matthew chapter 17, Jesus makes a very interesting statement after the apostles are looking at this withered fig tree. Matthew chapter 17 and verse 14. In Matthew 17 and verse 14 it reads, "And when they had come to the multitude, a man came to him, kneeling down to him and saying, 'Lord, have mercy on my son.'" I'm thinking of the other passage. "And when they had come to the multitude, a man came to him, kneeling down to him and saying, 'Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic and suffers severely, for he often falls into the fire and often into the water. So I brought him to your disciples, and they could not cure him.' And Jesus answered and said, 'O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him here to me.' And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, 'Why could we not cast it out?' And Jesus said to them, 'Because of your unbelief. For assuredly I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. However, this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting.'" I'm thinking of the Luke passage that brings up the fig tree. But Jesus makes that same statement about moving the mountain. Jesus is not saying if you pray today, you'll be able to take the Ohio River and move it several miles away. He's not saying that we can all of a sudden just move all these hillsides and change the position of them on a whim. What he is saying is that when you pray and you have faith that God can do anything, and if it is his will to have that decision or request be fulfilled, he has the power to do so. He can do that. So often we will pray for various things, especially pray for loved ones. Recently connected to our home congregation, there was a family that had a young daughter. I think she was probably 2 or 3 years old at the time. They had moved away, suddenly becomes ill. And we had an impromptu prayer service virtually the day after we found out. They could never figure out what was wrong with her. And now you have all these different congregations going, what happened? Hundreds, potentially thousands of people praying. We need to trust in God that he will make sure that he provides for us whatever we need to get through things. That may mean that we will experience loss, that we will experience hardships, but we still have hope. There is light at the end of the tunnel. I hear the statement made a lot of times from the pulpit is, I don't know how those who have no trust in God get through modern day life. There is so much going on in our world today that it can just consume everyone. Anxiety levels are up, mental health is a serious concern. God provides a great solution. We read earlier of the whole idea of the most that man can do to you is put you to death. That is the end of their power. No matter what trial or temptation you could face, physical trial you can face on this earth, there's a limit to what it can do to you. God can carry you past it. God can carry you further. So there are no limitations if our hope is in him. 1 Peter chapter 1, let's turn there before we move on to the next part of this hymn. 1 Peter chapter 1, starting in verse 6. "In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials, that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it be tested by fire, may be found to praise, honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ, whom, having not seen, you love, though now you do not see him, yet believing you rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory, receiving the end of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Joy inexpressible. I can't express how much joy that is, hence inexpressible. Right? That should be the joy we have with this hope. We should be shaking in the amount of joy that we experience. So often as soon as the hardships come, the trials come, it starts weighing us down, and we start letting go of that joy because we're consumed with the sorrow. We're consumed by the hardship. And although God says there's nothing wrong with being sorrowful, we talked about this morning in our Bible class, when those of us are sorrowful, it is our responsibility to then comfort them, to help bring them out of that, to get through it. The early church faced many trials, many hardships, mainly by the government, which we don't experience at the moment in this country as much. There's no one coming into this building this morning dragging us out saying you're not allowed to worship. That's what the early Christians experienced. And yet they continued with this inexpressible joy. And they came out of all of those trials and temptations feeling stronger, edified, and they felt worthy because God was saying, I'm not going to remove this trial because I know you're strong enough to overcome it with me. We see the present clearly, but he sees the first and the last. And like a tapestry, he's weaving you and me to someday be just like him. No one can know the future. We don't have that ability to predict what's going to come. And we can, as mankind continues to grow and as technologies get developed, we have become more and more convinced of our abilities, our knowledge, our wisdom to overcome certain things. And I'm afraid that kind of leads us down a very difficult and challenging path. Because by becoming more confident and being more comfortable with the knowledge that we possess, we tend to then want to go off and do our own thing. How many of you have ever gotten some type of piece of furniture or something that you had to build yourself and it came with a manual and you went, I don't need that. I was tempted when I was writing this lesson of like, oh, there's so many stories. Now it's my turn to tell a story of my father from the pulpit of something. I have many childhood memories of that, oh yeah, I can get that done in an hour, and then 3, 4, 5 days later, and it's still not very structurally sound. Right? But that's the mindset, right? We become so confident because we think, oh, that's a simple thing. I know I can overcome this with the knowledge that I possess. I'm just going to go forward. And we talked about the knee-jerk reaction, right? And yes, there's going to be times if we are trusting in God's word that our knee-jerk reaction may be the right one. But we still need to take a moment and understand that we need to be focusing on what God's choice for us should be. What is he wanting me to do in this moment? Versus just what is my initial reaction to things. Because we do not know what tomorrow is going to bring. In James chapter 4, starting in verse 13. James chapter 4 and verse 13. Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell and make a profit. Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. But now you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. The most common prediction we have in our society is still the weather. How many of you trust the weather forecasts? Just yesterday, I read that there might be some rain, and then around 7:15 back in Moundsville, we get the tornado watch warning, and everyone bunkers down in the basement for a few minutes. I didn't see tornado on the forecast that morning, right? But that's just one example, right? There's many things that we will start making plans a month, a year, several years in advance, and then I get very frustrated when things don't work out the way I planned it. I need to understand that it is God's will that I need to be following, not the will of Samuel in the moment. I need to be following after God's will and understand that when something doesn't work out the way I thought it would, to not then just get frustrated and say, well, why didn't you listen to my ideas? Right? Because there's someone in the Old Testament that was a follower of God. He's then presented with horrific trials to his family, his wealth, his physical health. And at the end, he's then trying to ask God, why is all this happening to me? Of course, I'm talking about Job. Why is this all happening to me? And God responds in a very illustrative way, in a whirlwind, telling Job, where were you when the foundations of the earth were formed? Job, you don't know what you're talking about. Job, you think you know. Samuel, you think you know what was best for you in this moment, but you were wrong. Let's turn to Ephesians chapter 4. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 17. Ephesians 4 and verse 17 reads, "This I say, therefore, and testify to the Lord, that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk in the futility of their mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart. For who, being past feeling, have given themselves over to lewdness, to work all uncleanliness with greediness. But you have not so learned Christ, if indeed you have heard him and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus, that you put off concerning your former conduct the old man which grows corrupt according to the deceitful lusts, and the renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the new man, which was created according to God in true righteousness." When we make that commitment, when we confess the Lord Jesus is the Son of the living God and is our Savior, and I am baptized to wash away my sins and arise that new man, I need to make sure that I am leaving that old man buried in those waters. So oftentimes, that's where most of the hardships come, is not so much the trials that I faced before I became a Christian, it's all the stuff that came after where I decided to go back to the old man, and now I'm trying to juggle. Now I'm trying to juggle the old and the new, and trying to keep a hold of both of them, because I'm not willing to give up those lusts. I'm not willing to give up the old self completely. We cannot allow ourselves to be so self-assured that it completely blinds us from what the path that God has laid out for us. We need to be willing to make that hard sacrifice of leaving the old man buried. There's a reason why we take this very seriously, because it's not just, are you saying that you are wanting to become a Christian, that you're wanting to start that new life. It's, are you willing to give up everything else? As we often say, are you willing to take up your cross and follow after him? Are you truly willing to give up everything? Everything that was evil and of this world. Are you willing to give that up? That was the problem the rich man had when he came to Jesus. Jesus, I've done all these things from my youth. I have honored every one of these principles. And Jesus simply said, can you sell everything you have and then come follow me? It's that idea of, are we willing to give up everything to focus solely on him? And then the conclusion of this hymn reads as follows: "He alone is faithful and true. He alone knows what is best for you." And the chorus reads, "God is too wise to be mistaken. God is too good to be unkind. So when you don't understand, when you don't see his plan, when you can't trace his hand, trust his heart." We may not always agree with the path that God is laying out for us. And we may not necessarily see it clearly or even understand that because we don't see every single step along the way. We can only see what's in front of us. Think of Abraham being told, okay, I'm going to take you to this land. I'm not going to tell you where you're going. I'm just going to make sure you get to the right place? Do we have that kind of faith? That although I don't need to see every single step along this path, I don't necessarily need to understand why God is having these circumstances arise, and I don't need to understand all of it. I just simply need to trust his heart and trust that he will not lead me astray. That if I trust in his word, I will get to where I need to be going. And that's what we read in Proverbs chapter 3. So if you would turn there one last time as we conclude this morning. Proverbs chapter 3. Proverbs chapter 3, starting in verse 5. In Proverbs 3 and verse 5, it reads, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones." So when all else fails, if I'm looking to Christ to be my light to my path, to be my guide, I don't need to understand every single aspect of what that's going to be out before me. I don't need to understand every decision that God's going to be making. I don't need to understand that entire path in front of me. I don't even need to see it. I simply need to trust in God, and I will know I'm on the right path. So when it is difficult for us to appreciate what his plan is for us, when we find ourselves doubting him, when we find ourselves struggling to follow him, simply remember that he does have your best interest at heart, that he truly cares for you. So when you don't see his plan and you can't trace his hand, you can still trust his heart. So this morning, if you once found yourself following after Jesus but have brought that old man back out and need to put that old man back down, and we need to pray on your behalf, or if you haven't let go of that old man yet, if you haven't taken on that Christ and become that new creature, we welcome you to come forward now as we stand and sing the invitation song.